In the dark vaults of history, the Earth whispered its first secret. Before the age of machines, before man learned to pull fire from the deep, there was a place where the Earth itself breathed flame. They called it the land of fire, Baku, a lonely stretch of rock and sea on the western edge of the Caspian. For most of the world, it was a forgotten shore, quiet, windswept, and strange. But beneath its stones, something ancient stirred. Travelers wrote of black liquid that seeped through the ground, thick and glistening. The locals gathered it in clay jars and called it naft, the breath of the underworld. To them, it was no resource. It was a living mystery, a sign that the soil itself could dream, could burn, could whisper secrets in smoke. And long before kings and conquerors realized its worth, fire worshippers, the Zoroastrians, had already bowed before its light. They built temples upon the breathing ground. They called these sanctuaries atashkas, the places of eternal fire. Inside those stone halls, the flames were never extinguished. Priests believed they connected earth to heaven, a bridge between the mortal and the divine. Every flicker, every ember, was a prayer in motion. And as centuries passed, that prayer continued, untouched by time, by empire, by war. Imagine a medieval traveler crossing the Caucasus under a cold sky. He sees a red shimmer on the horizon, not lightning, not campfire, but something older. He climbs a hill and finds a field of living fire breathing straight from the earth. The wind carries its warmth, but not its comfort. The smell is heavy, bitumen, sulfur, and salt from the sea. He stands in silence, realizing the world is older than its myths. Centuries later, when geographers and chroniclers began to write of this strange land, they recorded it as if describing a dream. Al-Masudi, a 10th century Arab historian, spoke of the flames that rise from beneath the soil, lighting the night like the stars themselves. Marco Polo would later whisper of the same wonder, a place where eternal fires burn without wood or smoke. And all of them agreed, there was no other place like it. The people of Baku lived with it. They cooked with it, lit their homes with it, healed wounds with its thick, dark oil. For them, this was not an industry, it was a heartbeat. And yet even they feared it, because no one could say where the fire truly began. Some said it was the work of Adder, the Zoroastrian spirit of fire, eternal, pure, untouchable. Others believed it was a punishment from below, the breath of something buried. But whatever it was, they learned never to fight it, never to dig too deep, never to wake what sleeps beneath flame. The medieval chroniclers noted that the fire temples of Baku glowed even through rain. They said the priests walked barefoot across hot stone without pain, their faces calm, their voices slow, as if time moved differently inside those walls. At night, the flame's reflections stretched across the sea like a silent prayer written in light. Fishermen navigating the dark waters used it as a guide, not a beacon of safety, but a reminder of the unseen world. There was something humbling in that glow. For those who saw it, it felt less like a marvel and more like a memory, as if the earth were recalling an older age when fire was still divine, not mechanical. And so the legend spread, not of gold or conquest or trade, but of the first fire. By the 12th century, Persian scholars began calling Baku's soil black gold. But not for wealth, for power, for mystery. They believed whoever controlled the eternal fire could harness both heaven and earth. And though empires came and went, Seljuks, Mongols, Persians, the flame remained. Even when wars raged across the Caucasus, the priests returned to relight what the wind had dimmed. Even when the oil seeped into the sea, staining the waves, they whispered that it was not pollution, it was blessing, because they saw the oil not as darkness, but as memory. The first natural oil field wasn't discovered. It revealed itself, patiently, quietly, waiting for eyes that could still see wonder. And in that quiet, the fire still burns today, though no priest tends it and no empire guards it. It burns because the earth remembers what man forgets. That light can rise from darkness, and that every flame, no matter how old, began as a whisper beneath stone. Sleep now, for in the next chapter, we descend deeper into the temples where the eternal flames were kept alive by hands that never trembled. Centuries before the word oil carried the weight of empires, Baku's fire was already a legend whispered across deserts and seas. Caravans moving along the Silk Road spoke of a place where night itself seemed alive, where the earth glowed without torches and the air smelled faintly of smoke and salt. To the wandering merchants of Persia, it was a wonder. To the monks and mystics who heard of it, it was something more, a sign that creation had never truly gone cold. The Zoroastrian priests called the flame adder. They believed it was the purest element, born from truth itself. In their temples, they kept the sacred fire burning, fed not by wood, but by the living breath of the soil. They said as long as the fire lived, the balance between good and evil would hold. And when it died, darkness would claim the earth. On the outskirts of Baku, near the wind-swept plain of Sarachani, one such temple stood, an altar of stone built around a single, eternal flame that rose from the ground without human touch. Travelers arriving at dusk would see its orange light rising like a ghost above the horizon. Even from miles away, they could feel the warmth carried on the cold Caspian wind. Within its walls, silence ruled. The priests moved slowly, their robes brushing against the sand, their faces calm and expressionless. Every breath they took was a prayer, every motion a ritual. To them, this was not fire. It was the soul of the earth made visible. And the people who lived nearby respected it in quiet awe. They believed the flame watched over them, that it protected their harvest, their homes, even their dreams. When a child was born, families offered oil to the flame. When someone died, they left a lamp to burn in remembrance. In their world, everything, life, death, and the light in between, belonged to the same sacred fire. But not everyone understood. When foreign travelers first saw the flames rising from the ground, they thought it was magic, or worse, witchcraft. Some chroniclers wrote that the people of Baku worshipped the devil of fire. Others, like Alistocry, tried to describe it in words that barely contained their wonder. Fire that feeds on nothing, that lives upon air alone. And so the mystery spread. In faraway courts, from Baghdad to Byzantium, tales of the land of fire reached the ears of kings and scholars. Some dismissed them as fantasy. Others sent emissaries to see the truth for themselves. Those who returned brought back stories that blurred the line between science and myth. They spoke of wells that bled oil and stones that caught flame with a spark. They said even rain could not put out the eternal fire. And they whispered that those who stayed too long near the flames would begin to dream strange dreams, of voices whispering beneath the ground, of memories that did not belong to this age. As centuries passed, the fire temples became symbols of endurance. Even as empires rose and fell, as wars swept through the Caucasus, the flames kept burning. No army could conquer them. No storm could extinguish them, because they were not built by man alone. They were built upon the earth's own heartbeat. For the priests of Baku, the fire was not something to control. It was something to protect. They believed that if men ever tried to claim it for themselves, to dig too deep, to sell its light for power, the balance would break. The earth, they said, would remember the trespass. But time is a way of forgetting warnings. And soon, others began to arrive. Explorers, traders, and rulers who saw not the sacred, but the profitable. They looked at the eternal fire and did not see a miracle. They saw a resource, and so the story of reverence slowly turned into one of desire. The fire that once symbolized purity would become the foundation of greed, empire, and control. But for now, in this part of the story, it still burns quietly beneath the Caspian sky, untouched by ambition, unspoiled by war. Sleep, Traveler, for the next part of our journey leads deeper into the moment when the sacred flame was no longer worshipped, but discovered. By the 12th century, the fire that had once been worshipped by priests began to catch the attention of men who no longer prayed. The world was changing. Faith was giving way to curiosity, and curiosity to ambition. Merchants traveling through the Caucasus brought word of a land where oil seeped through the sand like dark honey. They said it could burn for days, even through rain, and that those who carried it in sealed jars could light whole halls with a single drop. What was once sacred had become a marvel to be measured, traded, and perhaps one day controlled. The first to study it were not kings, but scholars. From Persia, from Arabia, and even from distant China, they came to see the miracle of Baku. Some arrived seeking truth, others opportunity. They walked among the fire temples, took notes, and filled scrolls with strange words: bitumen, naphtha, earth breath. One Arab geographer wrote, "The fire here burns without fuel, and the oil beneath the soil flows like blood from the earth." To him, it was not superstition. It was proof that the world itself was alive, that beneath the stillness of creation, there was always movement, always energy. In that age, no one yet imagined an engine or a factory. But those who saw the black oil rise from the ground could sense its power. They didn't call it industry. They called it destiny. Slowly, the temples became places of study rather than worship. Travelers from distant lands were allowed to watch the sacred flames, though never to touch them. The priests, now older and fewer, guarded what was left of their ritual. They knew the world was changing, and not all change was holy. When the Mongols swept through the region in the 13th century, they left the flames untouched. Even they, known for fire and conquest, seemed unwilling to challenge the Earth's own. But when peace returned, the silence around Baku began to fade. Maps were drawn, routes were marked, and whispers began in royal courts of black oil that could make nations powerful. By the time European travelers reached the Caspian shores, the stories had grown. They wrote of mountains that bled oil, of seas that burned, of villages where even the soil could catch flame. Some doubted what they saw, others feared it, but all of them agreed. There was something unnatural about fire that never died. Yet to the people of Baku, it was still a companion, both blessing and burden. They used its oil to heal wounds, to waterproof boats, to light their homes through the long winter nights. They never sought to take more than they needed. They believed that the fire gave, but it also watched. And if it was taken greedily, it would take something back. By the 15th century, traders began carrying jars of the black oil to the Persian Gulf and beyond. It was no longer a relic of worship. It was a commodity. But even as the first prophets flowed, the people still spoke of its soul. They said the fire was older than man's hunger, older than kings, older even than the sea. And so, while others saw it as the future, they still called it by its oldest name, the breath of the earth. It is strange to imagine now that the same substance that lights the modern world once lit silent temples beneath the stars. That what powers machines once powered prayers. That the first flame ever pulled from the deep was not made by men. It was revealed to them. And in that revelation, something changed. The sacred became useful. The eternal became measurable. The mystery became an industry waiting to be born. But deep beneath the fields of Baku, where the oil still sleeps in dark silence, the earth has not forgotten what it once was. It still remembers the hands that prayed instead of mined, the voices that whispered instead of drilled. Sleep now, traveler. In the next chapter, we journey into the age when the secret of fire was no longer kept by priests, but by empires. By the dawn of the 16th century, the land of fire was no longer a myth whispered by travelers. It was a curiosity on the maps of kings. Its name appeared beside the Caspian, written in delicate ink, surrounded by sketches of flames rising from the earth. And in the courts of Persia, The word Baku carried a strange power, not as a city, but as a symbol. The ancient Zoroastrian temples had grown quiet. Their priests were gone or scattered, their sacred fires tended by silence alone. But the flames themselves had not died. They still burned through cracks in the earth, even as new voices rose, voices of rulers, merchants, and explorers. From the west came whispers, scholars of the Vatican who had heard tales of this self-burning ground. To them, it was not merely a wonder of nature. It was a mystery that defied divine order. In hidden halls where theology and science met, they debated its meaning. How could the earth burn without man's touch? What spirit, they wondered, breathed fire from stone? Some said it was a remnant of the fire of Eden, the last trace of divine creation left untouched by sin. Others feared it was a gate to the underworld, a sign that hell's breath had reached the surface. But whatever the theory, the Vatican's curiosity grew. They sent envoys and missionaries eastward, disguised as scholars, bearing gifts for Persian courts. Officially, they came to study faith and language. Quietly, they came to find the source of the flame. One such envoy, Father Matteo of Florence, wrote in his journal in 1578, "We reached the land of eternal fire, where the earth exhales a breath so fierce it sets the very air alight. The locals say it is holy, but I cannot help but think it remembers something forbidden, a flame that once belonged to heaven." His notes never reached Rome. The caravan that carried them vanished near the Caucasus Mountains. Only fragments of his letters survived, preserved by local scribes who did not understand their language, but recognized the reverence in his tone. By then, the Persian Empire had begun to realize the value of the black oil. It could be traded, stored, and used for war. Soldiers learned that cloth soaked in oil burned longer, brighter, more fiercely than any torch. Alchemists began experimenting with it, searching for a way to refine its power. In time, even the Shah himself took interest. The sacred fire was becoming a weapon. Meanwhile, in Europe, the stories multiplied. Chroniclers spoke of an eastern land where the soil bled fire, and where ancient priests guarded secrets older than scripture. The Vatican scholars, already wary of heresy, began collecting every account they could find: Arabic manuscripts, Persian poems, travelers' logs. All were locked away in the archives beneath St. Peter's, filed under one word: Ignis Perpetuus, the perpetual fire. It is said that a single map from that collection survives, drawn not in ink, but in a mixture of oil and soot, showing a crude outline of the Caspian coast. At its center, marked with a symbol of flame, is written a single name: Atashka. What began as worship had become a mystery to be contained. What was once divine was now a secret of state. And yet, through all of this, the diplomacy, the fear, the curiosity, the fire itself remained unchanged. It neither grew nor faded. It simply existed, patient and unbothered by the ambitions of men. The empires came to measure it. The priests came to interpret it. The scientists came to explain it. But none could claim it completely. For every time they thought they understood its nature, it defied them, burning even through rain, through war, through centuries. And in that persistence, it became a mirror, reflecting the vanity of those who sought to possess what should only be observed. Somewhere beneath the sands of Baku, the flames still whispered, not to empires, not to kings, but to time itself. And in its quiet murmur, it kept the memory of the first prayer ever spoken before it. Light without beginning, flame without master. Sleep now, and drift further into the age when secrets began to turn to silence. When the Vatican's curiosity deepened into obsession, and the world's first natural oil field became not just a wonder, but a warning. In the heart of Rome, beneath the marble corridors of St. Peter's, there lies a silence that has lasted longer than any prayer. Behind sealed doors, beneath frescoed ceilings that tell stories of heaven, are rooms without light. chambers known only to the most trusted scholars of the church. It was there, in those vaults, that the first records of the Baku flame were kept. Bound in parchment, written in Latin and Persian, they were marked not as science, but as heresy. Because what the church could not explain, it feared. And what it feared, it hid. The earliest documents came from traveling monks who had ventured east under the guise of pilgrimage. They brought sketches, rough maps of the Caspian coast, marked with black stains where the earth was said to burn. They described a light that never dimmed, a fire that rose from the ground as if the world itself prayed to the heavens. To the theologians of the Vatican, such a fire was both temptation and threat. If divine fire could exist outside the church's sanctified rites, then perhaps creation itself was not as contained as doctrine claimed. And so, rather than declare it miracle or myth, they locked it away, hidden among manuscripts on forbidden alchemy and lost astronomy. Over time, whispers spread through the scholar circles of Rome. Some said the Vatican had mapped the land of fire in secret, a set of charts drawn in black oil, showing underground veins that stretched like veins beneath the skin of the earth. Others believed the maps were not geographic at all, but symbolic, illustrations of how divine energy flowed through creation, concentrated in certain sacred places. Baku, they said, was one of those places. A Jesuit historian named Father Benedict Rossi once wrote privately to his superior, "In the East, there burns a fire which neither man nor nature can quench. I believe it to be a remnant of the light spoken of in Genesis, the first flame before the sun." His letter was never published. His name was quietly erased from church records a few years later. By the 17th century, the Vatican had begun sending its own cartographers into the East, men trained in both geography and theology, sworn to secrecy. They carried with them small instruments of brass, rolls of parchment, and a single instruction: observe everything. Write nothing in plain form. The maps they returned with were unlike any others. They showed not borders or rivers, but circles of fire, concentric rings marking where the earth's breath met the open air. At the center of one such map was a single word: Ignis Primus, the first flame. But even as these records grew in the Vatican's hidden archives, no one outside those walls would ever see them. To the public, the land of fire remained a myth, a curiosity. To the church, it had become a theological riddle, one that might unravel more than faith could bear. Why? They wondered, did God allow a flame to burn forever in a land untouched by baptism or gospel? Why did He place divine light in the hands of those who followed older gods? And if the fire beneath Baku was not divine, then whose was it? In that question lay the church's quiet unease. It could not be denied. Travelers had seen it, written of it, drawn it. The earth itself confirmed its existence. And so the Vatican did what it always did when faced with a truth too large to control. It buried it, locked behind golden seals. The maps of fire disappeared into silence. Centuries would pass before their name was spoken again. But deep within those corridors, the scent of oil lingered faintly on the old parchment, a whisper from the earth that refused to die. And though no priest would say it aloud, some began to wonder if that scent was a warning, that perhaps the first flame was not a gift from heaven, but a reminder of what once burned below. Sleep now, listener, for in the next chapter, we descend further into the era when explorers and empires began to uncover what the Vatican had tried to forget. When the sacred flame became a symbol not of worship, but of control. The centuries turned like pages in a book no one finished reading. Empires rose and fell. Names changed. Faiths changed. But beneath the soil of Baku, the same quiet fire kept breathing, waiting, patient as the earth itself. When a modern age finally arrived, it did not come as prophecy, but as machinery. Iron towers replaced temples. Pipelines replaced prayers. Men in helmets drilled where once monks had whispered. And from the same black ground where the ancients had gathered naft in clay jars, 1,000 fires now rose at once, each one eating the dark. The world called it progress. But for those who remember the old stories, it felt like a circle closing. Because the first flame had never gone out, it had only changed its shape. What the Zoroastrians once called sacred, the world now called fuel. The breath of the underworld became the engine of civilization. And as cities grew brighter, the night itself grew darker. Deep in the archives of Rome, the old maps of fires still slept. Parchment yellowed, ink fading. But if you held them to the light, faint traces remained. Rings and symbols, drawn by trembling hands, as if warning of something yet to come. A Vatican archivist once said, almost to himself, "Every light we make demands a shadow." And he was right, because even now, in the age of steel and satellites, the earth still burns from within, quiet, endless, unseen. It does not roar like a god anymore. It hums softly beneath our feet. Perhaps that was always its secret, that the first flame was never meant to be worshipped or used, but remembered. So when you close your eyes tonight, and the darkness hums behind your thoughts, imagine the ancient breath of the world still glowing somewhere deep below. It does not sleep. It only waits. And remember, even the oldest fires never truly die. They just dream beneath the earth,